It was an unbelievable sight. American soldiers were on a medieval castle wall firing into the tree line. Right next to them were Wehrmacht soldiers, shoulder to shoulder, in full German uniforms doing the same thing. They were not prisoners nor captives. They chose to be there. There was just one American tank at the gate. Germans and Americans were sharing the same cover, the same ammunition, and the same enemy. The enemy they are firing at is also German. This is the Forbidden Alliance. It was not a film. This happened on May 5, 1945, in the Austrian Alps, the only time in the Second World War that the American Army and the German Army fought as allies. But in order to understand those walls, you need to understand what drove a decorated German major towards enemy lines under a white flag. To beg. Since 1241, Castle Itter had long been standing, 7 centuries of stone on a 2,185-foot hill in the Austrian Alps. And by 1943, the SS had turned it into a luxury prison. It was not a death camp like Dachau, but something even stranger. The Nazis had filled it with France's most important figures. It had former prime ministers, generals who had commanded entire armies, and even a tennis champion who had won the Wimbledon. These were men who had shaped a nation's destiny, now confined to a medieval castle under SS guard. 2 prime ministers, Daladier and Rain, and who blamed each other for the fall of France in 1940, were together in the castle. They ate at separate tables, argued over the radio. Generals Weygand and Gamelin were also there, 2 former commanders who had despised each other's record for years. These men were not getting along before this battle. But they shared one secret, which was a hidden radio, tuned to the BBC. They were desperate, because they knew exactly how little time was left. On May 2nd, 1945, the last commandant of Dachau arrived at the castle having fled as the Americans closed in on them. He committed suicide on the grounds that same day. This was enough for Sebastian Wimmer. Wimmer was the castle commander. He had promised his prisoners he would keep them safe, even against orders, and that promise lasted until a man shot himself on his grounds. Wimmer looked at the approaching American lines and ran. The French 5 IPs were suddenly free, but they turned around within minutes. The roads were full of SS soldiers who were executing anyone they considered a defeatist. They then realized that they were free but completely trapped. They armed themselves with weapons the guards had left behind and sent their Yugoslav handyman out on a bicycle with a letter in English, begging for Allied help. Not knowing if he had succeeded, they sent their Czech cook, Andreas Krobot, out 2 days later. Krobot reached Worgl. What they didn't know is that the story would begin here. Major Josef Gangl, a man who had been a soldier since 1935. He was there at the beginning of the war and served through the full arc of the war, from the early years of German victory to Stalingrad and Normandy and Bastogne, when it was clear to any honest man that Germany was finished. He had seen everything. Somewhere along that long road, Gangl had stopped believing. But he had not abandoned his men, nor did he run. He had quietly begun working with the Austrian resistance, protecting local towns from the SS units that were shooting people for hanging white flags in their windows. He still wore the uniform, but he had let go of what it stood for long ago. When Krobot arrived with the message from Castle Itter, Gangl understood immediately that the SS were moving to kill the French prisoners before the Americans reached them. He had 20, maybe 30 loyal soldiers, but they were not enough. He had only one option. So he grabbed a white flag, got into his Kubelwagen, and drove north. It wasn't because he wanted to surrender. It was all to find an ally. 13 kilometers north, in the town of Kufstein, Captain Jack Lee of the U.S. 12th Armored Division was waiting to be relieved of his duties. He was 27 years old. He was a former college football star from New York who looked like a war movie had invented him. He was chewing an unlit cigar when a German Kubelwagen came around the corner under a white flag. Lee put his hand on his pistol, preparing himself for any hostile enemy. But the German officer climbed out and saluted. Gangl explained the situation to him, requesting for his help. Lee looked at the map and looked at the German major, chewed the unlit cigar, and said,
"All right, Fritz, let's go get them."
His headquarters thought he was out of his mind, but they gave him the green light. What Lee assembled was the strangest convoy of the entire war. He brought a tank, 14 American soldiers, Gangl's Kubelwagen, and a truck of Wehrmacht soldiers in full German uniform, wearing black armbands to separate them from the enemy they were about to fight. They knocked through an SS roadblock on the mountain road. By nightfall on May 4th, they reached the castle. The French VIPs came out to meet them. They looked at one tank and at 14 Americans and a truckload of Germans.
"Where is the rest of the army?"
Lee climbed down from the Besotten Jenny.
"I am it."
He ordered prime ministers around like privates to get inside and stay away from the windows. Gangl's men were positioned along the southern wall, with black armbands marking them in the dark. Then, with the alpine night pressing cold around them, something happened that no military manual had ever imagined. American and German soldiers sat together on those walls and shared cigarettes. They shared food and checked each other's weapons. They talked the way men talk when they know the morning will be hard. 1 week before this night, these men had been trying to kill each other. There was no ceremony. It was just two groups of exhausted soldiers on a cold mountain watching the same tree line. In the darkness below, SS soldiers have begun to probe the walls. The sound of grappling hooks on ancient stone was heard. Machine gun fire was cracking from the towers. At the gatehouse, one of Gangl's soldiers looked out into the woods and made a different choice. He had left his post, panicked or switched sides. No one ever confirmed. He was simply gone. The men who stayed drew their cigarettes down to nothing and waited for the sun. At 8:30 in the morning, Lee climbed to the top of the keep with his binoculars. 150 SS soldiers were in the tree line. Two 20mm guns on the hillside. And further back, an 88mm flak gun was pointed directly at the castle gate. He climbed back down. And then the first shot came. The SS had already advanced from the tree line. The Besotten Jenny answered, covering the gate alone. Then the 88mm found its range. The shell hit the Besotten Jenny dead center. She burst into flames and the crew scrambled out by luck alone. Only the radio man had been inside, trying to fix the faulty radio. He got out just in time. Their only heavy weapon was gone. The battle became a grinding exchange of rifles and submachine guns against a force 3 times their size. The French VYPs came into the courtyard anyway. Renault grabbed an MP-40 and fired from the ramparts alongside Daladier, Gamelin, Borotra, Clemenceau, all of them armed and fighting. Lee reached the Austrian resistance on the castle telephone and told them they needed help. A shell hit the wall and the line went dead. They were out of ammunition and the SS were at the gate. On the ramparts, Paul Renault was manning a machine gun. The former prime minister was firing with great enthusiasm and almost no tactical sense fully exposed. Any sniper in the tree line below had a direct line on him. Major Gangl saw and rushed to warn him. He crossed the courtyard through the smoke from the burning tank, dodging rifle fire from every wall, shouting at Renault to get down, to step back from the edge. But a sniper's bullet caught him in the chest and he fell. He was the only defender to die at Castle Itter. The man who had survived Stalingrad and Normandy and Bastogne, who endured the full length of the worst war in human history, died in a castle courtyard trying to pull a French politician out of a sniper's line of fire. He did not die for Hitler. He did not die for Germany. He died for what this alliance had briefly become. All the ammunition was already finished by midday. The radio was destroyed, the tank was ash, and Gangl was dead. The SS were preparing a final push, and when they got through, there would be no prisoners taken on either side. Jean Borotra then stepped forward. 46 years old and a former Wimbledon champion. He told Lee he could get through the SS lines and find reinforcements. Lee said yes. Borotra put on peasant clothes, dropped over the 15-foot wall, and ran. The SS fired at him, but he kept moving. At one point, he walked directly into two SS soldiers at a machine gun post. He did not run. He simply waved at them like a farmer checking his land, walked to a nearby tree, pretended to relieve himself, and walked on. They let him go. He then found the 142nd Infantry Regiment on the road below and told them what was happening in the castle above. Back at the castle, the SS blew open the gate. Lee told his men to fix bayonets. Then a sound reached the walls that was not gunfire. It was the sound of engines getting closer. The 142nd Infantry came around the bend with tanks and infantry and opened fire on the SS from behind. The men pressing the castle were caught between the walls above and an armored column at their backs. They scattered into the woods. Lee stood in the courtyard, with a face black with smoke, and a cigar finally lit between his teeth. The relief commander walked through the gate. Lee looked at him.
What took you so long?
Captain Jack Lee received the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism. His citation mentioned nothing about the German major, nor about the Wehrmacht soldiers on those walls. The army recorded the heroism and buried the context. Lee went home, opened an hotel, and never talked about the battle. He died in 1973. Major Josef Gangl was buried in Worgl, Austria. He is remembered as a national hero, and a street was named after him. The German soldier who died fighting the Nazis. The battle happened 5 days after Hitler died and 2 days before Germany surrendered. Every man who died in those 72 hours died in a war already over, which makes Gangl's choice matter more. He could have waited and could have let it end without him. Instead, he drove toward the enemy and asked them to help him do something right. The only person who died defending that castle was a German who chose to be there. So here is the question Castle Itter leaves behind. Was Josef Gangl a traitor to his country or a hero to humanity? By May 1945, maybe those two things had stopped being different. May 5, 1945 is one of the most extraordinary and least told days of the Second World War. An American captain, a German major, a tennis champion, and 2 former prime ministers defending a medieval castle in the Alps against the SS in the final hours of the war. That is the kind of story we exist to tell. If this story deserved to be heard, hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. We read everyone. The next story is waiting.